first lightning rounds kickoff. I'm here with my colleagues Justine Cheung and Sebrena Jackson. We're the three power team of three co-organizers of the lightning rounds. And really quickly, you may have seen the promo video, but purpose of a lightning round is for a couple people during each meeting to quickly present an issue that they're grappling with in the area of serving older youth in foster care who are in college. Could be a policy issue, could be a practice issue, it could be a research issue as well. And since we're all here, we all work in capacity of working with older youth in care in some capacity, some shape and form. The idea is to get rapid, real-time feedback on a current issue, something that a person's currently struggling with, and to just draw on a collective wisdom in the group. So first presenter is going to be Lisa Schelbe. She'll present for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to have about 15 minutes of feedback. This is a chance where you can ask clarifying questions, throw out your ideas, and really just have a kind of a vibrant, fast-paced group discussion. All right, so I will turn it over to Lisa. Oh, and by the way, this is being recorded. So if you miss it or if you want to share this with friends, it will be available on the NRC-FAHE website. All right, Lisa, I'll pass the mic to you.
Great. So thank you. Are you now seeing my screen?
Yes.
Lovely. Okay, so let me start with the presentation. Okay, so first I want to say thank you for joining me today on this talking through some speed bumps. And while I am presenting this work by myself, I have many colleagues that I have collaborated with in various capacities working with the campus support program. One of them here today, Isa Samara, I want to acknowledge his amazing work that we're doing with the Photo Voice project. That's not exactly what I'm presenting on today, but it is still the same campus support program. I am presenting work that I have been doing with people that a name that you know and probably love, Jennifer Geiger at the University of Illinois, Chicago at the Jane Addams College of Social Work, and Lisa Jackson, who was presented here previously, and she is the director of the Unconquered Scholars Program at Florida State University, which is part of the Center for Academic Retention and Enhancement. And then the statistician on the project is Christopher Schoberg at University of Central Florida. So what I want to talk to you today about is some of these little speed bumps that we're hitting. And it's not just that I see that I'm hitting these speed bumps. It appears that across the literature, some are experiencing some of the same. So I'm really excited to talk about where I am and get some feedback to help not only me and my team, but also hopefully move the field forward. So a bit about my research focus broadly, I'm interested in the transition out of foster care when young people are aging out, specifically interested in those who are students looking at how they do it in college. I am focused on campus support programs. And one of the areas that I'm really interested in is postgraduate experiences. So we all know the research. I'm not going to bore you to death. But we know that youth in foster care disproportionately do not attend college, despite the fact that they really are interested. So what's going on with that? But we know that their graduation rates are a little bit lower. And what we don't know, though, is what happens after graduation. So enter my research project. So I am collaborating, or I have collaborated with the Unconquered Scholars Program at Florida State. And we collected data for 5 years. So we followed students at baseline, 6 months, and 1 year. So they completed an online survey that had a bunch of questions about service use, perceptions of helpfulness of services, their feelings of preparation at graduation for life after graduation. And then there were also some open-ended responses. So what I'm talking about today is my baseline, my data at year one. So at right at graduation. So not at year one, right at graduation. I have 54 graduates, which is about half, a little bit more than half of the students who graduated from the campus support program. I'm sorry, from Florida State who are enrolled in the campus support program. The sample's predominantly female, majority is Black, and about 1 out of 10 identifies Latino or Hispanic. I did have incredible attrition, about 50% by 1 year, but to be honest, that's not really the focus of today because I'm really just talking about what I'm doing at the baseline, right at graduation. I'm analyzing the data through thematic analysis and basic descriptive statistics with seeking to understand how do students engage in campus support programs and how can they better prepare students. So that's my project. I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions on my projects before I talk about my questions. Anything that I can clarify? Okay. So let me take you to my questions. So actually, one more thing. So when we talk about the Unconquered Scholars Program, you see that there's that really messy bullet point that talks about the services that are provided. It's fairly typical to other campus support programs: advising, coaching, financial aid, advocacy, some concrete services such as computer labs, some designated space, skill workshops, and then a real sense of building community. One thing that's not on the slide that is important to point out about Unconquered Scholars is it's really basically use a youth empowerment model. So a lot of the services and programming is done because the students have asked for it, and all decisions are made with student voice incorporated. The students who are involved in Unconquered Scholars are not just former foster youth. The campus support program serves all students who receive waivers for those who have been in foster care, as well as those who've experienced homelessness. I know that's very similar to a lot of campus support programs, and that drives my first question. And this is something that, is, I think, apropos across multiple studies. How are people handling literature reviews when there's a campus support program serving students who have a history of foster care, but are also serving students who have homelessness? Because these are not the same population. And I'm seeing some head nods. And I will even broaden the question that some of the campus support programs that students can self-select in. So a child who was raised by their grandparent, but never officially entered state care, some campus support programs include those, and yet they technically are not in foster care. So I'd be happy to keep talking about this issue because I'm seeing what's in the literature and how people are doing it. But really, I want to stop and pause here and ask the question about what people's thoughts are. I don't think that we're doing it well, and I want to know what folks are thinking.
All right, good first question. At least we just opened it up to. So take a moment to think about it. Please unmute yourself. Just feel this is really informal. So just feel free to jump in. You can ask a clarifying question. You can come up with thoughts, share an experience, answer the question. Yep, we'll open up the floor.
And Justine, I know that your voice is sore. Otherwise, I'd be calling on you because I saw your head shaking violently.
I'm gonna try.
Okay.
And if I just start spastically coughing, then you're just gonna have to forgive me. Yes, I agree. And it's really hard. I can tell you with our program, we tried to be as inclusive, right? Because we don't want thing to be a barrier. we could spend the whole time talking about just this, Lisa, because
I know.
so many youth thought that I've got several this year that thought they were in care, come to find out they were never formally. Like they literally thought they had an open case, but when we reached out to the state they were in or whatever, come to find out, no. Do we not serve them? It becomes almost an ethical dilemma, right?
Right.
And for me, the only way to get the clean data is you have to ask the students, I need the specifics about your history. And I don't know about the rest of the people in the Zoom room. That makes me really uncomfortable to do it. And we recently were evaluated, and I think I shared that with you, Lisa, the evaluation.
Beautiful piece. Thank you.
It's just hard. Like, I don't have the challenge of having the homeless population in my group, even though, believe me, I am the social worker for that group because they don't know where else to send them. But as far as participation goes, my funder is specifically for foster youth. I don't have a great solution other than to being very specific when I'm doing the research. They have to say when they were in care and what age. When did they exit? Have they exited? Like, to me, that's the only way to get the clean data.
All right, other thoughts, other reactions from folks about this first question about handling a literature review when you have a CSP that serves students with histories of foster care and possibly homelessness or just homelessness.
And I'm not surprised that we're not getting a ton of questions, like ton of thoughts, because like some of the folks that are doing this work, I mean, what we're doing right now is that you write what's known about students who've experienced foster care, you talk about homelessness, but then when you start talking about like it together, it's really gets complicated quite quickly. And
Definitely
it's
very messy, right?
And it's dangerous, especially since many of us can talk about the housing instability that comes upon aging out. But that is not the same as students who are on the waiver for homelessness. Like that's quantitatively, probably qualitatively different. And I'm real concerned about making sure this nuance is preserved, and it's clunky.
And it's you also have some programs that may have started off to have a very kind of narrow, strict focus, and then extra funding came along, and then or maybe it merged with another program, and there's one program even possibly with different counselors that are serving different populations of students. It can get really kind of messy, and then there's also the overlap too. Like there's some, it's a lot of folks have written about that young people in foster care, students in foster care have had experiences that distinguish them from other student populations. But see, there's overlap, right? Some students in care definitely have experienced homelessness, and some students who have been homeless, maybe they haven't formally been in care, but they've lived with relatives, and they basically had to run away from or move away from their primary family. But it goes back to this critical point about like differences in needs, and does that warrant differences in services? Yeah. I mean, I personally think that having a paper that looks at some of the main campus support programs that are out there, and just there's like a really detailed, almost like an inventory, like it categorizes them, and there's a side by side. Are the students that serve just youth in care, do they tend to look similar? Do they look different than programs that are a little bit more expansive and serve other student populations? But yes, it is really challenging, just from a definitional standpoint.
Yeah, and like that expansion, like I think that's probably going to be really important, because not all students with a history of foster care are going to have the same resources. The case example of a child being raised, you know, for most of their life with a grandparent is going to be a lot different than someone who aged out after spending the last, you know, 8 years in group homes. Yeah, I like your idea, Nate, of like looking at how we see the different campus support programs. Although I promise you, like, I've looked on some campus support program websites recently, and like, I can't even tell who they serve. Which is a whole nother thing. If you're thinking about like how students may be struggling to figure out where to get access to services, and like I, as a professional with the expertise in the area, can't figure it out, it's kind of scary.
I mean, you know this, but in several of the interviews for the Photovos study we're conducting, that exact thing came up of several students were mentioning that they didn't even know they were eligible for these services until several years into their college life. And of course, having those resources at the outset, at the beginning, would have helped immensely. And because they didn't have those services, they experienced homelessness for a time, and that further complicates things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, excellent point.
I'm really eager to hear from, there's some other people. I hate putting students on the spot, but I also am like, okay, people, we're here to have a conversation. And Justine and Lisa and Nate could fill up the whole time, I promise. Sebrena too. But I'm trying not to because I'm sick. But I'd love to hear other people's thoughts, especially those that are practitioners. Like, how are you handling it?
My name's Jessica. I work at Texas A&M Corpus Christi with a supervised independent living program. And so the problem that I'm finding is, so I only support youth that have aged out of foster care or had spent time in the foster care system. But we don't have anything on campus for youth that had experienced homelessness. So they're just like, oh, Jessica will know what to do. And I'm like, Jessica does not know what to do. You know, so I'm having to try to work with, you know, some of our other different departments and scrambling to, you know, I know what services my students can utilize if they are having trouble with, you know, finding housing, but a lot of time, you know, a requirement for those services is that they were aged out of foster care. So it's just kind of like a, you know, just she's the closest thing, I guess they figure, she'll figure it out. And then another thing, not so much with youth with homelessness, but we have a program for first generation students as well, that they're kind of trying to have us do more and more things together. And so that's another group that's going to start getting, I think, I don't want to say lumped together, but they're going to try to encourage more collaboration. So.
Lisa, I had another thought. Oh, Melissa put her hand up, so I'm gonna let somebody else talk besides me, and then I'll circle back around.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Rapp. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at the University of Washington. Good to see some familiar faces. And this, I don't know how helpful this will be. It's maybe more of a policy solution, but I think that it's something that I would love to see across the nation. And that is that, so my program started and worked with anyone that had ever been in foster care. And so they could have been in foster care as infants and then adopted and sort of run the gamut. And I think that's actually a really interesting population to work with, because we have worked with many students who are adopted, and then the second they turned 18, or some of them 16, their adopted family was like, peace out, like you're a pain and we don't want to work with you anymore. So, and then they experienced homelessness. So they did experience foster care. It was at a younger age. But the thing that I think that Washington does really well that is interesting is the Washington Student Achievement Council, which disperses all financial aid, state aid across the state. They have a data sharing agreement with DCYF. So they, because there is a statewide scholarship that supports young people that have been in foster care past the age of 13, I can go into a portal and see if a student's been in foster care. And so we also work with students who have experienced houselessness without their families, unaccompanied homeless youth. And those students are also eligible for the scholarship. But it's really helpful because in the portal, I can see if somebody has been in foster care past the age of 13, it's very clear. There's just a yes, basically. I don't get access to any of their court records, any details. I just see that, yes, they have absolutely been in Washington State foster care. It obviously doesn't work for students who maybe experience foster care in another state. But I think it's so helpful because it also eases the burden of students to prove that they've been in foster care and that they're eligible for our services, which I think is a problem sort of nationwide from what I'm hearing from a lot of campus support programs, especially in working with financial aid. So yeah, more of a policy solution and maybe a long-term view of what is possible, but it's been just immensely helpful for us. And I would love to see other states copy that.
I would love to copy most of the things that are happening in Washington as someone who's living in Florida. And thank you for that. I took some notes.
Yeah, and just to connect to an earlier point, having that notification, one, it eases the burden of students having to track down documents and so forth. But also, I've heard so many stories of that too, where students saying like, I went through college and I didn't know there was all these services and funding that was available to me. And now, one, it would have made things a lot easier, but also I have all this student debt. And if I had known earlier, in a study that we did in California called Cal-Youth Study, we asked youth who had finished high school or GED, high school credential, so potentially they're eligible for an education and training voucher, a $5,000 a year voucher. And there was about a third of them that said, I don't know what an ETV is. I don't know what a CHAPE grant is. So part of it also is that as well. If you have a campus that is able to identify youth up front, then the campus can be proactive about making sure that students are getting the funding that they have a right to.
Yeah. So I want to be respectful of the second presentation. So I'd love to jump into my questions 2 and 3, and I'm going to condense them.
Lisa, can I throw in just a really fast comment?
Oh, please. Yes, Justine, I totally forgot. Please.
No, and this is kind of an outside of the box way of thinking about your question 1. Those of us that do peer review, I think it also falls on us when we're reviewing articles to really point out that if somebody is writing on this topic,
yeah,
that they have got to be the ones that's specific in defining this.
Thank you so much. Yes. And my apologies to those of you who I peer reviewed and not known it was you, but I would have given the feedback too that I have been a stickler at times, being like, you can't lump them together and just say that education is important for this population and cite Nate and Mark Courtney's work. I mean, they're different populations when we talk about homeless youth. So youth have been experiencing homelessness. So let me go to question 2 and 3, combine them. So I would like it to be in a higher ed journal, but my sample is incredibly small at, approximately 50. It is data over 5 years. I can argue that this is such a small sample or a small population, and it's a hard to reach. And so I think I can do this. But I'm concerned. The journals that I'm considering are Journal of Diversity in Higher Ed, Journal of Higher Ed, Journal of College Student Development, and Journal of Post-Secondary Student Success. So those are journals that I'm considering. Various ones are a reach. Probably the newest one is Journal of Post-Secondary Student Success, which I think I may have a fighting chance. But if people want to drop in the chat, if they think that any one of those really resonates and that should be a target, or if there's another journal I should go for, because I want to talk about theories. So if I am targeting higher ed journals, unlike social work, they're not fond of atheoretical work. And the work is required to be grounded in theory. The theory that I've circled around a lot is Chickering's 7 vectors, which looks at you can think of what did I just do? you can think of vectors as stages where they're going through. It's a developmental theory. So it's looking at basically developing competence and managing, I'm looking at my notes, developing competence, managing emotions, moving through autonomy towards independence, developing mature interpersonal developments, establishing identity, developing purpose, and developing integrity. So we're looking at those categories. I think that's a good theory to match with campus support programs and definitely aligns with a lot of Unconquered Scholars vision. But do people have, with the last couple of minutes remaining, do people have some other theories that you think would be very relevant and that I should consider?
Mhm.
And I see Justine, self-authorship. Awesome.
So and it's very different than the way we think about it in social work. I'm just going to suggest one of the best things I ever did in my PhD was I took a bunch of higher ed classes, and one of them was student development theory, and it changed totally how I sift or how I think about my program from what is the goals of higher ed, not just what do we think should be happening as social workers, if that makes sense. But Baxter Magolda, that's my gold standard for higher ed theory.
Okay. I'm reading actually a really, it's a classic. So if I could remember the name of it, it's like a 2-inch thick textbook that's higher ed theories. It's a big green, but that's my light reading right now, trying to get up to speed.
All right, do we have other suggestions from folks on just theory that might be a good fit to think about? Lisa's project, journal suggestions.
I'm including my email in the chat if you want to get in touch with me later. My slides will eventually be off the screen, but please consider reaching out with ideas.
Yeah, some ideas, they hit you in the middle of the night. The perk needs to percolate a little bit. I have one suggestion for a journal. I'll put it in the chat with the description of it. That might be one to check out. Yeah. It's called Innovative Higher Education. They're pretty flexible.
Awesome.
And they publish stuff before for population of students with foster care backgrounds.
We will be having a special issue coming out from Child and Adolescent Social Work Journal on post-secondary education for former foster youth. And yet I really would love us to, in the future, try to do one of these special issues and one of these journals. Yes, Justine, that's why half of my work goes through Carrie Carney.
There's a translation issue.
It is.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think I'm out of time, but I really appreciate this opportunity to think with you all and to talk about the speed bumps that I think I'm facing, as well as I think others may be facing as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Okay. All right, now we're going to turn it over to Ms. Sebrena Jackson, who's going to share our slides, I think on behalf of Justine, right?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm serving as Justine's voice for the day, since she's really hoarse, and I think Justine will hop in as she can to be a part of the conversation. Are you able to see my slides okay? Perfect. So what we're going to talk about is from a practice perspective. And so looking at the mental and emotional well-being of campus support program practitioners, we know we do a lot, and we have a lot of conversations about the students that we serve, which is, again, what we just started a conversation with Lisa, but very little is being talked about or discussed in the literature around what's happening with the folk that are actually serving this population. And so I thought it was a wonderful idea that Justine had as she thinks about and thought about her work in the role of program director of the Bridging Success Campus Support Program, and just her colleagues and others that she's worked with that have been serving this population. And so again, just a quick synopsis of Bridging Success. Of course, it's an amazing program. They're working with students from the applying to ASU all the way through to supporting them once they get to campus. And they're doing that support in a variety of ways through coaching, career readiness. The team is made up of the program director in Justine and a clinical coordinator, and there are also peer mentors that work with the students as well. And so in terms of the primary population that we wanted to talk about today, in terms of the issue, is really, again, focusing on the social work practitioners and even the higher ed professionals that are serving foster youth in campus support programs. Again, Justine noted that the work is super rewarding. Of course, everyone knows it's incredibly challenging work though, and it requires from the staff that work these programs really non-traditional work hours that challenge boundaries. Their need to be available to students often at these non-traditional hours. What does that look like? These staff members are also working with students who've experienced trauma, whether they're through foster care or in some cases the homeless programs. So there's certainly risk for vicarious trauma, especially for those non-social work professionals who haven't had that training and had that background. But even for social work professionals, the risk of vicarious trauma is real, and the staff members having to navigate that. So what's the thing we're trying to achieve, or Justine wants to achieve? Part of the challenge that she described in conversations with us is the need to retain staff, and as they're working with this population, depending on their background, depending on their training, how they handle the trauma and the things that come in the non-traditional work hours, it's difficult to keep quality staff. And of course, we know this population has already experienced, if they've been in child welfare, they've already experienced a lot of transition in those that work with them. So retention is really important, but also wanting to make sure that staff that work with these kinds of programs are well, mentally and emotionally. And wanting that to be on the radar and a focus of this work as we are thinking about supporting students. What are we going to do for the staff that support these students? Justine mentioned the need to increase higher education leadership, just awareness of the challenges of this work. Thankfully, more and more leaders are embracing the need to have campus support programs and wanting the youth to be served. But I think the need to increase their awareness of just what happens and the kinds of challenges that staff members are receiving is critical. And wanting those leadership members to know, or leaders to know, that workers need more support. The staff that are serving these programs and serving these students need support. And so we'll just hop right in to there are three questions that we have, but or Justine has primarily, and I'm really interested in this, so I was excited to be able to share on Justine's behalf. But the first question, one, I'm just curious if you've been thinking about this and what Justine talked about what if there's anything in the literature around the staff members that or the practitioners that are actually serving the population, but how can institutions of higher ed better support these practitioners that are serving these youth that have the foster care histories? Again, given the need that there's such a need for so much individualized support and engagement with them. And I mentioned already the non-traditional hours that are required and all these things. Just from your perspective, from a practice perspective, at this point, what do you think institutions of higher ed can do? What can colleges do or universities do to better support the practitioners that are serving this population of students? And with that, I'll pause. And Justine, do you have anything else that you would want to add before we get some feedback on this first question?
No, other than I hope eventually this will lead to a qualitative study like this is, but how do we think about it? And what are the important questions as practitioners that we want to ask of higher ed institutions and of each other, if that makes any sense? And just to give a little more context, just really fast. I've been this is my 8th year doing this work at ASU. And this was born out of, there's 3 of us in Arizona that are very tight. We're at 3 different institutions, but we have a group chat and it is very dark at times. I'm not gonna lie, but we're supporting each other as we're trying to navigate child welfare systems, higher ed systems, and then being in the trenches with the students doing the work. So it's like, how does everybody else get through this work? It's wonderful, but incredibly hard. So other than that, can you advance the slide, Sebrena, to the question slide?
Yeah, I actually did. So you're not able to see that. I'm sorry. Let me see what's happening. Let me stop sharing and then I'll share again. I thought it was advancing. Are you able to see that now?
Yes,
Okay.
perfect.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
So again, the first question, what are your thoughts about how higher ed institutions can support the practitioners that are serving this population? Or if you're a practitioner yourself, what kind of support do you feel like you need from, from administrators at your university to more effectively serve this population?
This is Jessica again. I need help. It's just me.
Mhm.
And I have 12 students in our supervised independent living program, but we have about 60 on campus utilizing the tuition and fee waiver. So it's a lot for just me.
Mhm, 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 mhm.
Jessica, if it makes you feel better, I hear that from people all over the country.
Same.
That like it's one of us or there's 1.5 of us, like, and that's it.
I was put into a larger department about a year ago, and it's afforded me an opportunity to at least have a student worker handle some of the marketing sort of things, if you will, to kind of push the program out there. So that's been helpful, but you know, a full-time person would be awesome.
So Jessica, if you don't mind me asking, so where do you find support in terms of colleagues? Are there other departments on the campus, whether it's first gen office or other, where do you find your support?
So usually quarterly or so, A&M, our titles are foster care liaisons. We'll have a meeting and kind of discuss, but unfortunately, a lot of times there's somebody that has an agenda where we'll cover things, so we really can't talk about, but some of us will email each other and kind of interact in that way. Moving into this new department and people kind of learning what the program does, and so more people are starting to see how, I think people thought a lot of the time I just sat in my office and had kids stop in and just had a good old time all day long. But they're, people starting to see, so they're a little more understanding and provide a lot of support. So that's really helpful. And then I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I still have a really good connection with the person that did my social work supervision. And so he and I will chat quite often. So
Thank you for sharing that. And so it sounds like one of the things that institutions may consider doing is having some additional staff or some additional positions to support. Lisa, would you mind sharing a little bit about the structure in terms of the staff, even in Unconquered Scholars? Are there a number, is there a team of people at Florida State?
Yeah, so Unconquered Scholars has grown over the years. It was established in 2022. I'm sorry, not 2022, 2012. It started with a part-time intern, and it has grown that there are 2 full-time staff and an intern. But it is housed within the Center for Academic Retention and Excellence, which is a program for first-generation students. And that center, actually, that acronym is CARE. CARE is supported both by student affairs and academic affairs. So it has a lot of support from the university. I will say, in thinking about it, I think some of the things that I can see that institutions can do better is that just broadly trauma-informed practice. And the movement, I know that there's some movement for universities to become trauma-informed, but just thinking broadly about this. And so we're not just telling staff, you know, have a bubble bath and a glass of wine and you'll get over it. Rather, we're creating a culture of community care, moving away from self-care, so that it's the institution's responsibility to make sure that staff are not getting burnt out, because it is such demanding work. And the last thing I'll say is that at Florida State, we get funding based on our metrics, and sometimes our metrics come down to single students, meaning like, do we have, like, we will hit another percentage point if we have like 5 more students. These graduation rates are on the radars of administrators. And if we can say that our staff is effective, that's been a way that effective in retention, that's been a way that we have gotten more funding for line. So I pass that on. If anyone's interested, I'm not the one who can really speak to this, but I can connect you with folks who are doing the practice work.
Yeah, and I thank you for sharing that. Here at Alabama, our program is called Alabama Reach, and Shannon Hubbard is our director, and we're literally she's in the process now of hiring a second staff member. But for the first several years of the program, she was the lone, she's been the lone practitioner, lone, staff member. But I think one of the things that Shannon did to try to help, find that support, to find that community, she connected with the School of Social Work and, really spending time with colleagues there. But I think having another staff member, a full-time person now on board, to help, I think is going to make a difference. But similarly, she had to make the case in terms of tracking the numbers, the number of students that are being served, sharing the outcomes in terms of graduation rates and retention, to make the case for why there was a need for a second staff member, which I imagine it adds to the stress and challenges, right? One person is already having to serve, this population and all that means, while also trying to build the case to justify the need for more support and help. So something to think about. Justine, you were about to share?
Yeah, and I think, and that is another dilemma of doing this work, and I'm hoping Melissa and Jessica will jump in, is it's hard to apply higher ed metrics, success measures, especially when you're a brand new program, right? It took me 6 years before I could even get evaluated about outcomes to be able to address what are the higher ed metrics that we use to measure success. And we've talked about this at the national level before, and it's also a very important student population, but it's a small student population, especially at ASU, where we have like 130,000 students, right? And I'm serving at any given time about 220, right? It's really hard to get the buy-in from the university when they'll go, yes, super important population, but when we're counting numbers, when you're counting 220, it looks very different than you're counting 30,000 first gen, right?
So that's even another question or challenge to be addressed with this.
Yeah.
And as we think about the time, even considering the other 2 questions as well, how do practitioners, we started this conversation, how do practitioners meet their own personal mental and emotional health needs, given the often intense nature of the work, and just kind of how do practitioners think about boundary setting and best practices around setting boundaries when working with the population, because I think there's a tendency to be all in, which is important, right? That people who are working with this population in campus support programs have a heart and passion for the work, but it also means that they may sometimes overextend themselves and not necessarily keep those boundaries and establish solid boundaries because of their heart to serve and to be available to students. And so the need to think about what that should look like for practitioners that are doing this work. Any thoughts or comments about that?
I have a quick thought comment. I'm gonna have a quick idea to question number one before it gets away from you. But it seems like going back to like burnout, this seems like it's a structural problem. Like some of the findings from Jen Geiger's work on campus support programs, one of the things that struck out to me is how campus support programs, a lot of them are funded just by a hodgepodge of funds. Some by university, some by public dollars, some by private dollars. And so I think one of the things that would help a lot would be to have a stable kind of guaranteed source of funding, for example, like from federal legislation. And then a second thing is just developing a campus support program model that specifies a staff to student ratio that's attainable, that's workable, that's doable. And once we have that in writing and maybe some evidence that says, hey, this is a good number. If you go above this, you're going to get worker turnover. Students are going to suffer. I think that's kind of like seems like a structural problem, and changing laws in the funding source might be something that's a little more stable. Yeah, question two. I've heard workers talk about this a lot, especially during the pandemic, especially where there was just stress coming from everything was times 2, times 3 in some cases. And yeah, I mean, I think just the boundaries is critical, not just for the worker, but also for students to help model setting boundaries for students. So I remember talking to one worker that said, you know, I used to work over the weekends and say, text me anytime. And I just needed some space. And the students were actually supportive of it. I said, you know what, good, like take time, take space. We want you to be well. That, and then I was just thinking a little bit before about what believe it was Jessica who mentioned this comment, just about talking about different supports in the university, maybe even like cross program supports, if there were like local networks of people doing similar work. So if you're the only one at your campus, you're probably not the only one in your area of the state, you know, developing kind of support networks, because it's different talking to folks who maybe work in a different department and don't really face the same realities that you do versus someone that's in your seat at a different school. I think that's another possible, you know, possible way for practitioners to be supported.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nate. That is so important. And I was thinking about when you were sharing about the numbers and trying to come up with really a best practice benchmark for that. I thought about just the child welfare system in general and how we finally got to the point where there was some literature around what makes sense in terms of caseloads for child welfare workers because of the high turnover among those who are working with those populations. And so maybe the need early on, and I'm sure it's definitely a gap in the literature with this work as well, is what makes sense, for that, and to be able to then infuse that into legislation and into policy. But I think it has to come from this group, right? It has to come from researchers and practitioners who are doing this work to be able to inform, policy around this area. In many ways, it's still so new. I think there's so many pieces to this work that is still, kind of undeveloped or undiscovered, especially in the literature. So, this is such a great topic and such a great conversation to bring up and to lend to the higher ed literature, but also to the child welfare literature, because in many ways, although these are social workers, in higher ed or in the higher ed environment, in many ways, some of them may feel like almost child welfare workers in a sense because of the population. So just to thank you for just raising this conversation.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Lori Bortuzzo. I'm with the Western Success Scholars Program out in Bellingham, Washington. I want to add a few items as I'm just gathering information. I've been slowly trying to be a little bit more visible and trying to share some of the things that we're doing out here. But again, I'm always so interested in these opportunities. So thank you for this opportunity to be here. In regards to question number one, there was just a few things that came to mind in terms of, Lisa, when you were talking about the culture of community care. That is key for some of the work that we're doing here through the Western Success Scholars Program, which is a program that is our campus-based support program for foster youth and students that have experienced homelessness. My colleague Melissa Rapp is here from University of Washington, and we again highlight that Passport to Careers program that's implemented through the Washington Student Achievement Council. But through that, a few things really quickly. One, we have a regional team. So when we talk about being able to actually reach out to our peers that are doing similar work, I have to say that for me, here in the Northwest Regional team, we meet monthly. So these are people who not just within higher education, but within our community, nonprofits and DCYF who work with foster youth, that we get together monthly and we collaborate and we share and we can sort of, again, there's that support that we're providing each other in terms of the work that we're doing. Here on campus, I have what's called the WSS, Western Success Scholars Liaison Team. And the liaison team is somebody from counseling center, somebody from tutoring, somebody from housing, from basic needs. And what's nice about that, not only can I provide a warm handoff to the students in terms of when they are in need of supports or services, but they're also colleagues that I can lean on. And I can't tell you I have many times. So that's been very helpful. And then one other thing we implemented this past year, again, some of this was also COVID led too, but we was a basic care and concern team that meets weekly. And through that team, I'm also provided support in terms of when there's a student that is identified as a Western Success Scholar, that I also have, again, colleagues that I can sort of collaborate with and lean on if I'm struggling in terms of providing support to the student or direction that I can, assist the student. So those are, but Lisa, I just love that culture of community care. I couldn't do the work that I do or feel supported the way I do without the team that's surrounded that I get to work with. So in terms of serving these students, but thanks for these opportunities. I'm going to try to be more involved because this is so good. And nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too, Laura. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And we look forward to learning more about the work that you're doing and what's happening there. Nate, I don't know. I think we may be, I don't know where we are with time. If we want to kind of wrap up now, I have Justine's email at the bottom there. If you're interested, I know there'll be lots of other conversations that hopefully you'll have other ideas and things that will come up as well about this topic, whether it's directly to Lisa or to Justine. But I'll pause and turn it back over to Nate.
All right, great. Thanks, Sebrena. And I dropped Justine's email in the chat in case you wanted to grab it. I know sometimes my best ideas come after the fact, that I tend to marinate a little bit. So feel free to grab her email, send her any thoughts that come to mind. We just again like to thank you for coming out to this first lightning round. Again, this will be the recording will be available on the NRC website. We're going to be recruiting again for a spring lightning round. Right now, we're just offering it 2 times a year, see how it goes. So keep an eye out for that email. And again, thank you so much for coming out. All right, folks, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.